resident L5R sort of commentator. This is just one of those situations where if I record it live, then it gets hosted on Twitch, and it's really easy to export it to YouTube. If I, record it and then upload it to YouTube, it's more effort. And I also can record it live in case anyone wants to drop in and ask questions as I'm doing this. So, the topic of today, about 2 weeks ago, I received an email saying that the first copies of the latest L5R novel were available for review. So there we are. We are here today to discuss Curse of Honor, the first of the L5R novels that will be coming out, according to this website, on the 6th of October 2020. So you can expect that later on this year. Obviously, it's a bit of a wait from this review. It's why I haven't really been rushed to sort of get it out. So we're going to talk first sort of a bit about the background of the book, what's happening with the novels and things like that. What are the plans for more novels in this space? And then I'm going to give you sort of a brief overview of the book. Spoilers free, partly because one of the conditions of getting a review copy is you don't talk about necessarily what's happening in the book. The main reason for that is that it's not... when you get a review copy, it's not always fully edited. There's usually some changes that make their way into the final copy, so you kind of have to be a bit patient and accept that a few of the story points, some things might change by the time they make it out there. So if you do it all deep in dive, not only are you ruining the book for people, but also the person may not actually get the book that comes out there. So, that's something to consider. So this will be a spoiler-free review. And I've given myself sort of a bit of time between reading it and doing this just so that I'm not going to inadvertently spoil anything for people. But if you have any questions, just sort of jump in and let me know, or let me know in the comments on this video. So let's just start off sort of with a bit of the plans. So Aconite Books is a subsidy of Asmodee, so the company that owns Fantasy Flight Games, and they have been given the rights to publish several books set in the L5R universe. Currently, there are 3 books planned. We have the Curse of Honor, which we're talking about today, which I've already read. We have Poison River, which is tailed as a lazy aristocrat detective in the city of the Rich Frog. Crane, called Daijoji Shin, is investigating a murder. And we have a more sort of... and that's called Poison River. And we have sort of a more relaxed book. I'm just trying to remember. It's called Midnight Lanterns. It's a more dragon-focused, sort of mystical book, as far as I remember. The Midnight Parade of 100. No, the Night Parade of 100 Demons, which is being written by Mary Brennan, who wrote the Dragon Clan book, and that's set in the Dragon and Phoenix lands on the night of the full moon. So let's just have a run through of those so everyone knows. So Poison River is a Daidoji Shin mystery, is what it's called. The first Daidoji Shin mystery, implying that they're sort of planning to do more. And basically the Imperial Governor assigns this lazy Crane nobleman to do an investigation. A murder with no bodies and a missing actress present a distraction that could finally make him put in a full day's work. So he's quite a lazy character. Then Night Parade, which is not coming out until 2021 January, is basically based on sort of chaos erupting in a small dragon clan village, and then an Agasha samurai is sent to investigate, and then he has to confront his past and deal with a Phoenix visitor, and they sort of pair together to sort of deal with those kind of things. I think that's going to be very good. Mary Brennan has proven herself to be very good in terms of the fantasy elements of the world. So therefore, over the next sort of half a year, you're going to get 3 L5R novels. I do encourage you to buy them, partly because, from what I've seen so far, they're setting out to be good, and partly because, of course, that helps support the franchise and let the FFG's studio know that we appreciate the L5R universe being used this way. But also, they're probably genuinely good reads. So let's go back to Curse of Honor, so the subject of the topic today. The author is David Annandale, who's a Canadian author, I think. Um, but I don't know much more about him. I just know that he has done a lot of writing in terms of writing his own books, but also a lot of writing in the Warhammer 40k universe. Very much has a pedigree of writing that sort of dark fantasy, both in 40k and also in his own writing. So, of course, the perfect choice really to write a Crab Clan novel. Curse of Honor. The reckless pursuit of... So this is the blurb. The reckless pursuit of honor exposes an empire to demonic invasion in this epic fantasy novel of duty and warfare set in the extraordinary world of Legend of the Five Rings. Striking Dawn Castle defends the mountains between the Rokugan Empire and the demon-haunted Shadowlands. When a mythical city is discovered in the foreboding peaks, Hideharu, heir and sore disappointment to his family, seizes the opportunity to prove himself. His rash expedition ends in disaster. Just one samurai returns alive, and Haru is lost. Before a power struggle can break out, Striking Dawn's battle-hardened commander Ochiba is dispatched to rescue Haru. She succeeds against supernatural horrors, but Haru is changed. Now mysterious deaths and ill fortune plague his family. Something evil is on the loose and must be stopped at any cost. So this, if you couldn't tell already, very much a Crab Clan story. Striking Dawn Castle is one I think we have a map for, and I think it's in the northern in the northern mountains, which is sort of to the north of. Okay, maybe we don't. But anyway, it's kind of in the maps. It's sort of described as being sort of to the northern part of the Shadowlands, in sort of a mountainous area, and very much like it is on the wall. So it is either close to the wall or part of the wall. So very much Crab in that regards. I guess the main things kind of to evaluate, because I don't want to get into spoilers. You can sort of see within this blurb that already there's several very Rokugan-y themes coming out. So firstly, you've got this idea that there's some a mythical city that sort of pops up and they find it, and that's sort of the discovery of something that would prompt the Crab to feel like the need to act. There's this idea of a character, Hideharu, who is a disappointment. The blurb won't tell you why, but just like assumedly he's failed a few times, and he's sort of kind of needs to prove himself in some way because he's heir to the castle. So clearly there's a lot of pressure, and I think maybe if you think about the title Curse of Honor, maybe part of what you're thinking about is it referencing the idea that there's this person who is pressured because of his duty as an heir to a Rokugan family who runs a castle on the Shadowlands wall. Pressure on him maybe to prove himself because he's disappointment, which forces him to do this rash expedition where only one person comes back alive. So you're instantly starting to see these very strong themes that people who like L5R will recognize. The fight against evil in terms of fighting against the Shadowlands, the idea of honor and pressure and the need to prove yourself and be worthy to serve your clan in that way, especially in the Crab, where duty is very, very important in terms of pushing yourself to excel. And then there's the power struggle where the heir has gone missing, and what does that mean for the future of the family? Finally, sending out the best soldiers you have to find the person, and then running into some sort of supernatural horrors. And the idea of change, and maybe whatever he encountered there changed him, something which the Crab will be very, very aware of and dealing with. So very much, I think that the blurb on this, it brings up these very evocative Rokugan themes of the Crab duty, the taint of, say, sort of trying to sacrifice yourself. I mean, duty comes off maybe 5 or 6 times, but also just this notion of sacrifice. So, I mean, beyond analysing the blurb, I guess just to give my own thoughts on the book, I've obviously read a lot of fantasy novels beyond just knowing a lot about L5R. I would say it was good. Yeah, like genuinely, I would say it was quite good. I think the character work was very good in terms of sort of motivations and sort of why they acted. They all felt believable. One question I sort of asked myself as I was reading the book is, do these feel like good characters in a fantasy novel, or do they feel like good L5R characters? Because you can be both, and I'm trying to be aware of my own bias as a reader in terms of liking something because it plays up certain stereotypes which I enjoy from the L5R world. But I would say that genuinely I think the characterization of his book is very good, and I think they come across as very real and believable characters who operate within the confines of what we'd expect from Rokugan, but do it very much for their own motivations and their own desires in terms of being fully fleshed out sort of characters. So whilst it is definitely something set in the L5R universe, I wouldn't say that it leans too heavily into the setting in terms of using it as a crutch. So a lot of times you get fan books and they're written in a universe, but they rely on that universe as a crutch in terms of fan service, in terms of doing things just because that's what they think people want to see, or people having motivations that aren't really, like characters that aren't really fleshed out, but they behave in a certain way because the universe dictates that's how they should behave and how people would expect them to behave, rather than actually putting the time in to give those characters sort of good motivation for actually doing what you're making them do in the book. So I think in terms of characterization, I very much feel that this succeeded beyond just being an L5R novel. I think the characters came across very well. Next, I kind of wanted to ask myself, does this feel like Rokugan? And as you can already tell by my analysis of sort of the book, the blurb, very much I constantly, when I was reading the book and when I was, just exploring it, and I should say I read the book in 2 days. I sort of tore through it. I found it very good. Was very much that, for me, this felt like part of Rokugan. Like I could very easily, see how what they were doing tied into the broader struggle on the wall and all these sorts of things. Now, that's not to say that someone who didn't have that background couldn't enjoy this novel. And actually, I think even without a background in Rokugan, just seeing this as a microcosm story where something is happening somewhere and these people have to deal with it because it's evil, even without that background context, I think you could still enjoy this as a novel. I think with an understanding the context of the wider struggle that the Crab have had over the centuries and how that builds in them to create more of a feeling of resolute commitment, of how they work together, of the broader picture of all the other places where this sort of evil is being fought and the history they have with it and how much energy it takes to fight against it. Having that context helps you in some ways understand and appreciate the novel as sort of a minor part of that fight. But I don't think it's necessarily exclusive in any way in terms of people who haven't read haven't read so widely on the Rokugan thing. So I think in terms of, does this feel like Rokugan, I would say yes. But it also feels just like a good sort of fantasy setting with enough details behind it. It's not focusing on characters that you care or know about from the story. You're not going to have Hida Kasada rock up or any of his children rock up. But by getting rid of all of that baggage that you're already supposed to know about characters and just setting it in a place in Rokugan, it does a great job of making the story sort of both accessible but also good in terms of as a standalone story, being enhanced by the lore that comes behind it but not relying on it. And I think we'll see from the other stories that Aconite put out, the Daidoji Shin book is very much keyed as being the first. It says it on the cover, the first of his mysteries. So I think there will be series that build on things they've done before, but clearly there's probably a desire from Aconite to make a series of books that are good and standalone in their own right as a gateway to the setting, that lead into the books that lead more into the setting than just publishing books that you require a large amount of backstory to get into. And I think that's very, very smart. Just talk about other things. As you might expect, the Shadowlands features in this book, they're right next to it. I feel like the Shadowlands is handled very well in the times that it shows up. It's made to feel like the sort of imposing presence that it should be, and you can kind of get a real grasp of why they have these fortifications and why they exist. I think that's very important to get across. I think the plot is very good. there's just lots of nice parts to it. Again, not being able to do spoilers, I can't really talk about the real bits that I liked, but basically there were lots of parts of the plot I liked. I felt it developed in a very linear way, which I know is important to a lot of readers of fantasy, and I feel like that was very good in terms of how it sort of played off the characters' motivations as well. So if you're looking for sort of a book that focuses very much on characters, places them in the world, and then kind of pushes them through certain challenges and sees how they react to it, this is exactly the sort of book that this is. So it's a very much a character-driven novel, which I think most L5R should be. It's not a sort of place where... It's not the sort of universe where things, happen and they just happen, without people being involved. It is very much these things are going on and people have the power to change them, and if they try hard enough they can change them, and heroes will be born and heroes will succeed and heroes will fail. And I think any story that doesn't capture that element of human power, because this isn't, in some ways the Shadowlands in some portrayals is meant to feel more like a Cthulhu sort of evil, a distant sort of evil. And I don't think personally that that's the appropriate way to portray events that happen in Rokugan, because it is very much a heroic setting. The idea being that you, as a human, because you've inherited power from your ancestors and you pray to the kami and you have spiritual blessings and your weapons are blessed and you've prepared in the right way, that you can then fight the evil that seems unsurmountable at times, and you can succeed. Whether the evil is human, like it might be in one of the murder mysteries that comes up later, or it is some sort of mystical, potential mystical evil. Very much this book is focused on the characters that it puts into place and how they respond to the events in a way that I think very much resonates with the Rokugan setting in a very positive way, because you end up, having feelings for and against certain characters just based on how they've responded to the situation and how they've reacted. And I would say that the fact that you're doing that and it's all echoing together shows the strength of tying the characters to the narrative like this book does. That's all I really think I can get away with saying, obviously without spoilers. The only other thing is that magic is of course present in here. I think most of the time the magical system in this book is cohesive and this is something I know from talking to a lot of other fantasy writers, that one of the things, not fantasy writers, fantasy readers, is one of the things that actually annoys them quite a lot is when the fantasy setting doesn't hold to its own rules in terms of magic. There's one place in this novel I think maybe, and people, once they've got it in their hands and looking at this review in retrospect, when it's out and I can do a fuller one of the things I think this book potentially doesn't do necessarily well is explain or justify any of the magical systems that come up in it. It's not a huge problem, again, as I say, because this book focuses on people a lot, but it is a case where there are once or twice where I'm just like, but that doesn't really make sense in terms of magic. And that may be, this is an issue, that may be a case of me with my own bias about how I understand magic in Rokugan to work in terms of it being based on kami and spirits and things like that, and not being a static or not being like a very much elemental / spiritual magic, ancestral magic combined with elemental magic to create a kind of magical system of offerings and blessings and things like that. And there are points in this book where I wonder about the magical system, because it seems to be doing things that don't really make sense in terms of there's no offerings, there might just be a permanent thing, and you're kind of like, okay, I could see how this could work, but equally there hasn't really been anything established as to how or why this works. So that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but that's not to say everyone's going to pick up on that. If that's not the sort of thing you care about in your fantasy novels, I know plenty of people read fantasy novels and don't really care whether or not there's consistency in systems, as long as the person does something cool. But it's just something that I personally always care about in my fantasy novels. I like when there's... I like when there's strict guidelines and sort of things laying out, because then I can imagine where things go and I can iterate on them and I can guess at the future of the plot, and nothing like Deus Ex Machina is going to come in and be like, oh, well, we can just do it this way. Like, with the Deathly Hallows, for example, in Harry Potter, where suddenly there's a way that he can die and come back to life. No spoilers, it's been out for years. Suddenly there's a way he can talk to his parents. There's a wand that can beat anyone. There's a magical cloak of invisibility he's had all his life. And maybe that was her plan from the start, but the point is that, there's so much in the Harry Potter universe that happens because they want it to, not because it makes sense, because there's no actual basis for how magical energy is expended beyond some people are more powerful than others and can do more magical things. And if you learn the right word and flick your wand the right way and focus hard enough, you can do it too. Like, it's not a robust form of magic, whereas you go into other systems, like say early Dresden Files, where he very much has, he has to draw the right symbols and keep the right focus, and he can only do certain things based on his power. After, like, later on in the novels, it gets a bit more wishy-washy as he starts to get more power, because the writer clearly needs to escalate, because there's been 16, 17 novels now. And you have other places where, like, there are plenty of examples where there's formulaic systems of magic and you kind of just have to build on them. Something like Rivers of London, for example, where they have Newtonian magic and you have to perfectly master every single mental image of a form, it's called, that does one small thing, and then if you've got the perfect image of those, then you can tweak them slightly and they do slightly different things, or you can layer them on top of each other. But you can only do it if you slowly manage and memorize every single step to create that more powerful effect. Which means that the main character, no spoilers again, it's been out for a while, but if you look at the Rivers of London books, for example, the main character spends the majority of the first 2 books not really knowing how to do that much magic, because it's hard, and it takes 10 years to learn how to be a master level magician. You can't just will something to happen. You have to build up the fundamental basic knowledge and layer it on until you reach a position where you have skill. So, that's sort of a comparison. Again, I don't think it's a problem for the book, because magic doesn't really feel like it's necessarily a pillar of what the book is going on, because it very much feels like a character-focused novel. But I guess it is just something I noticed, that there were a few points where I'm scratching my head being like, but they haven't really given context for why that's possible and how it's working the way it is. It just looks cool, which is fine. And things can just look cool and be fine. They don't necessarily agree with me, but other people might just enjoy watching them. So there we go. There's sort of like a quick review. Kind of just to give my final thoughts. Did I like it? Yes, very much. I read it quite quickly, which implies that it's a book that I sort of tore through, and there are 26 chapters, so it's not necessarily a short book to go through so quickly. I found the pacing was very fun, very interesting. I sort of kind of really wanted to know what happened to the characters. I found it really enjoyable. Seeing how they changed, responded to the plot that was going on. So would I consider this a success? Yes. Yeah, I think this is a good book. I think this is a good L5R novel, but I think it's a good fantasy novel in general. I think people who like their fantasy with a bit of horror and a bit of fighting against evil in are going to really like this. I think people who are fans of the crab and fans of that idea of duty are really going to like this. In general, I think it's probably just worth a pick up and a read. For anyone who is interested in this kind of setting and fantasy. I don't think you're going to go wrong. I think this is a strong first choice from Aconite Books, just in terms of releasing something that is both good by its own merits and also good as part of the universe as well. So, in the end, is it a groundbreaking, award-winning fantasy? I'm not really sure, but is it a good read? 100%. So definitely recommend picking it up. If the rest of the books are of this quality, then they will probably all find a place on my shelf sooner or later. And with that, I'll leave you. Thank you very much, and bye.